another one. I Hit Bottom and Survived by Ted Erickson of 16237 South Cornuta Avenue, Bellflower, California. Southern California Representative, National Enameling and Stamping Company. I used to be a terrible worrywart, but no more. In the summer of 1942, I had an experience that banished worry from my life. For all time, I hope. That experience made every other trouble seem small by comparison. For years I had wanted to spend a summer on a commercial fishing craft in Alaska. So in 1942, I signed on a 32-foot salmon seining vessel out of Kodiak, Alaska. On a craft of this size, there is a crew of only 3, the skipper who does the supervising, a number 2 man who assists the skipper, and a general workhorse who is usually a Scandinavian. I am a Scandinavian. Since salmon seining has to be done with the tides, I often worked 20 hours out of 24. I kept up that schedule for a week at a time. I did everything that nobody else wanted to do. I washed the craft. I put away the gear. I cooked on a little wood-burning stove in a small cabin where the heat and fumes of the motor almost made me ill. I washed the dishes. I repaired the boat. I pitched the salmon from our boat into a tender that took the fish to a cannery. My feet were always wet in my rubber boots. My boots were often filled with water, but I had no time to empty them. But all that was play compared to my main job, which was pulling what is called the cork line. That operation simply means placing your feet on the stern of the craft and pulling in the corks and the webbing of the net. At least, that is what you are supposed to do. But in reality, the net was so heavy that when I tried to pull it in, it wouldn't budge. What really happened was that in trying to pull in the cork line, I actually pulled in the boat. I pulled it along on my own power. Since the net stayed where it was, I did all this for weeks on end. It was almost the end of me, too. I ached horribly. I ached all over. I ached 4 months. When I finally did have a chance to rest, I slept on a damp, lumpy mattress piled on top of a provisions locker. I would put one of the lumps in the mattress under the part of my back that hurt the most, and sleep as if I had been drugged. I was drugged by complete exhaustion. I am glad now that I had to endure all that aching and exhaustion, because it has helped me stop worrying. Whenever I am confronted by a problem now, instead of worrying about it, I say to myself, Erickson, could this possibly be as bad as pulling the cork line? And Erickson invariably answers, no, nothing could be that bad. So I cheer up and tackle it with courage. I believe it is a good thing to have to endure an agonizing experience occasionally. It is good to know that we have hit bottom and survived. That makes all our daily problems seem easy by comparison. And the next one. I used to be one of the world's biggest jackasses. By Percy H. Whiting, Managing Director, Dale Carnegie and Company, 50 East 42nd Street, New York, New York. I have died more times from more different diseases than any other man, living, dead, or half dead. I was no ordinary hypochondriac. My father owned a drugstore, and I was practically brought up in it. I talked to doctors and nurses every day, so I knew the names and symptoms of more and worse diseases than the average person. I was no ordinary hypo. I had symptoms. I could worry for an hour or 2 over disease and then have practically all the symptoms of a man who was suffering from it. I recall once that in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, the town in which I lived, we had a rather severe diphtheria epidemic. In my father's drugstore, I had been selling medicines day after day to people who came from infected homes. Then, the evil that I feared came upon me. I had diphtheria myself. I was positive I had it. I went to bed and worried myself into the standard symptoms. I sent for a doctor. He looked me over and said, "Yes, Percy, you've got it." That relieved my mind. I was never afraid of any disease when I had it. So I turned over and went to sleep. The next morning, I was in perfect health. For years, I distinguished myself and got a lot of attention and sympathy by specializing in unusual and fantastic diseases. I died several times of both lockjaw and hydrophobia. Later on, I settled down to having the run-of-the-mill ailments, specializing on cancer and tuberculosis. I can laugh about it now, but it was tragic then. I honestly and literally feared for years that I was walking on the edge of the grave. When it came time to buy a suit of clothes in the spring, I would ask myself, should I waste this money when I know I can't possibly live to wear this suit out? However, I am happy to report progress. In the past 10 years, I haven't died even once. How did I stop dying? By kidding myself out of my ridiculous imaginings. Every time I felt the dreadful symptoms coming on, I laughed at myself and said, "See there, Whiting, you have been dying from one fatal disease after another now for 20 years, yet you are in first-class health today. An insurance company recently accepted you for more insurance. Isn't it about time that you stood aside and had a good laugh at the worrying jackass you are?" I soon found that I couldn't worry about myself and laugh at myself at one and the same time. So I've been laughing at myself ever since. The point of this is, don't take yourself too seriously. Try, yes, laughing at some of your sillier worries and see if you can't laugh them out of existence. I'm going to try and get one more in. It's getting a little warm because the sun is bright. I have always tried to keep my line of supplies open, by Gene Autry, the world's most famous and beloved singing cowboy. I figure that most worries are about family troubles and money. I was fortunate in marrying a small-town Oklahoma girl who had the same background I had and enjoyed the same things. We both try to follow the golden rule, so we have kept our family troubles to a minimum. I have kept my financial worries to a minimum also, by doing two things. First, I have always followed a rule of absolute 100% integrity in everything. When I borrow money, I pay back every penny. Few things cause more worry than dishonesty. Second, when I started a new venture, I always kept an ace in the hole. An ace in the hole. Military experts say that the first principle of fighting a battle is to keep your line of supplies open. I figure that principle applies to personal battles almost as much as to military battles. For example, as a lad down in Texas and Oklahoma, I saw some real poverty when the country was devastated by droughts. We had mighty hard scratching at times to make a living. We were so poor that my father used to drive across the country in a covered wagon with a string of horses and swap horses to make a living. I wanted something more reliable than that, so I got a job working for a railway station agent and learned telegraph in my spare time. Later, I got a job working as relief operator for the Frisco Railway. I was sent here, there, and yonder to relieve other station agents who were ill or on vacation or had more work than they could do. That job paid $150 a month. Later, when I started out to better myself, I always figured that the railroad job meant economic safety. So I always kept the road open back to that job. It was my line of supplies, and I never cut myself off from it until I was firmly established in a new and better position. For example, back in 1928, when I was working as a relief operator for the Frisco Railway in Chelsea, Oklahoma, a stranger drifted in one evening to send a telegram. He heard me playing the guitar and singing cowboy songs and told me I was good, told me that I ought to go to New York and get a job on the stage or radio. Naturally, I was flattered, and when I saw the name he signed to his telegram, I was almost breathless. Will Rogers. Instead of rushing off to New York at once, I thought the matter over carefully for 9 months. I finally came to the conclusion that I had nothing to lose and everything to gain by going to New York and giving the old town a whirl. I had a railroad pass. I could travel free. I could sleep sitting up in my seat, and I could carry some sandwiches and fruit for my meals. So I went. When I reached New York, I slept in a furnished room for $5 a week, ate at the automat, and tramped the streets for 10 weeks, and got nowhere. I would have been worried sick if I hadn't had a job to go back to. I had already worked for the railway 5 years. That meant I had seniority rights, but in order to protect those rights, I couldn't lay off longer than 90 days. By this time, I had already been in New York 70 days, so I rushed back to Oklahoma on my pass and began working again to protect my line of supply. I worked for a few months, saved money, and returned to New York for another try. This time, I got a break. One day, while waiting for an interview in a recording studio office, I played my guitar and sang a song to the girl receptionist, Janine. I Dream of Lilac Time. While I was singing that song, the man who wrote it, Nat Schildkraut, drifted into the office. Naturally, he was pleased to hear anyone singing his song, so he gave me a note of introduction and sent me down to the Victor Recording Company. I made a record. I was no good, too stiff and self-conscious, so I took the advice of the Victor recording man. I went back to Tulsa, worked for the railway by day, and at night I sang cowboy songs on a sustaining radio program. I liked that arrangement. It meant that I was keeping my line of supplies open, so I had no worries. I sang for 9 months on radio station KVOO in Tulsa. During that time, Jimmy Long and I wrote a song entitled That Silver-Haired Daddy of Mine. It caught on. Arthur Satherley, head of the American Recording Company, asked me to make a recording. It clicked. I made a number of other recordings for $50 each, and finally got a job singing cowboy songs over radio stations, WLS in Chicago. Salary, $40 a week. After singing there 4 years, my salary was raised to $90 a week, and I picked up another $300 doing personal appearances every night in theaters. Then in 1934, I got a break that opened up enormous possibilities. The League of Decency was formed to clean up the movies, so Hollywood producers decided to put on cowboy pictures. But they wanted a new kind of cowboy, one who could sing. The man who owned the American Recording Company was also part owner of Republic Pictures. "If you want a singing cowboy," he said to his associates, "I've got one making records for us." This is how I broke into the movies. Started making singing cowboy pictures for $100 a week. I had serious doubts about whether I would succeed in pictures, but I didn't worry. I knew I could always go back to my old job. My success in pictures exceeded my wildest expectations. I now get a salary of $100,000 a year plus 1/2 of all profits on my pictures. However, I realize that this arrangement won't go on forever, but I am not worried. I know that no matter what happens, even if I lose every dollar I have, I can always go back to Oklahoma and get a job working for the Frisco Railway. I have protected my line of supplies. That was great. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you. This is the very last chapter. We're reading some of this. There's 32 stories altogether from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. I appreciate you.